Hello everybody. Today is harmonic dictation day. So we're covering the 3/3 chord in major, in minor, what have you. It is our final chord. It is our final diatonic triad that we have not covered thus far yet. And there's kind of a reason for that, as we'll see in a moment. So it is exceptionally uncommon. Especially in classical music. In other genres, sure, okay, and as we'll see, it does have kind of a poppiness to it in certain moments that actually makes it very appealing for a lot of genres. But in terms of our classical idiom, which is primarily what your textbook is drawing from, it's particularly uncommon. It basically happens in sequences, and it serves as a preparatory chord for 6, and that's basically it. There's really not that many other places that it happens. So we'll talk about sequences at the end. We'll come back to that. But it's not a very stable chord due to its tonic similarities. The only difference is that Do becomes T, right? That's it. That's the only change. You've got Mi and Sol stay the same. They're so similar that you don't really see them as... And 3 doesn't really feel strong as like a tonic substitute either. So it's just kind of this weird middle ground. What happens a lot of times is it does precede 6. The sequences that we'll look at later will kind of reveal why this happens, but it also gives us this wonderful, to cut to the chase, it gives us this wonderful descending fifths motion. Right? That's a big thing that happens in jazz a lot of the times. And so on. So you do see 3 before 6, and often before 2-5-1 or 3-6-4-5-1, etc., because you do get that nice fifth motion. But again, other than that, relatively uncommon. Okay, let's look at its inversions. Right, the solfege for your 3 chord is Mi, Sol, Ti, or Me, Sol, Te. Right. If you hear what sounds kind of like you want to listen for Mi in the bass for root position, a 3-6-4, like a lot of 6/4 chords, is relatively uncommon unless it's the product of voice leading. But for our purposes, we won't really see a 3-6-4. So what you're listening for is, do you hear Mi in the bass or Sol in the bass? Right? In minor, what gets tricky about the 3 chord is that 3 becomes major, right? Because we've lowered our root and our fifth, which then gives us a tonic or a major triad, right? So 3 is your other major chord in minor. We've got 3 and we've got 6, which are both major. So that can get kind of tricky. But again, if you hear 2 major chords that are then followed by, say, a half diminished chord, something like this, right? 3, 6, 2, 5, 1, etc. So the majorness will stick it out, and I find that 3 in minor is easier than 3 in major for that reason. So yeah, that's basically it. What you may be asking yourself is, well, wait a second. If 5 has a raised T in minor, why doesn't 3? Well, if we get T over a 3 chord, that would make it an augmented triad. A 3 with a plus sign, augmented triad. It's possible. It doesn't happen that often. You almost always will see Te rather than T, so that you can get this nice triad, this major triad. A 3 augmented is possible, but for our purposes, we're going to basically only see it Me, Sol, Te instead of Me, Sol, Ti. Right? So, in case you were wondering that. Okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at an example together. Okay? Here's kind of a typical example in a major key. I had to make these 6 chords instead of 5 chords just so that we wouldn't start on 3. So, pretty straightforward, right? It follows that progression that we saw before. 3 precedes 6. Notice that to give us a bit of a different bass, we've got Do, Mi, Do, but then it becomes a 6-6 on that 3rd chord, right? Right? and so on. And then we go to 4, which only one note changes. And then, of course, 5, 7. We still have that common bass pattern, fa, sol, do at the end. So you want to ensure that you're always listening for that. And yeah, 3 in this case just happens on its own. We don't have do up to sol, which that would be particularly odd, okay, to go from a root position 1 chord to a first inversion 3 chord. That wouldn't really happen. That sounds too close to 5 in that case, right? So again, all the more reason why 3 is such a limited chord in limited uses, okay? This is a pretty typical way to see 3, especially with looking at our piano notation here. 6 chord dictation, this is the kind of thing that you can expect. In fact, let's go ahead and do a dictation, please. So, 6 chords. I'm going to give you 4 listens. I may expand that. We'll see. As you can see, we've got SATB voice leading. C minor. Right? 4 listens, 6 chords. Now, you can expect a 3 somewhere in there. Okay? Everywhere else that we have is something that we've seen before. Okay? So, remember, things that we've seen before. We've seen predominant 6s. We've seen 6 as deceptive cadence. We've seen 5 as dominant. We've seen 7 fully diminished as dominant. We've seen 2 diminished. We've seen 2 half diminished. And we've seen minor 4. Okay? So, all that realm of possibility, we're adding in 3 now. Okay? So, let's go ahead and take a shot at this. We'll start with 4 listens. I may or may not decide to expand it to 5. We'll see. In any case, here we go. Listen 1. Pardon me? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, listen 2 of 4. One, 2, 3, 4. Okay, for this third listen, I'm going to go ahead and roll the chords. I want you to try to pick out what's going on, especially in the second and third chord. Things get a little bit odd. So really try to pick apart the solfege operating within each of these harmonies as we go through. So here we go. Okay, I'm going to roll each chord. 1, 2, 3, 4. Take about 20 seconds. Okay. I'll give you 2 more listens. I'll expand from 4 listens to 5 listens. Really try to nail down everything about this, ideally. Okay, so remember, I'm expecting just bass and soprano, but you often have to go into the inner voices to hear certain clues. Okay, especially because you may have discovered that the soprano line is kind of a static line. Okay, something kind of tricky. You got to really listen in. So 4 of 5. I'll give you 2 more listens. Okay, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's do one final listen, okay? One final listen. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at this one, okay? So, here we go. Now, I'm going to jump to the end really quick. We end on a half cadence. We have our cadential 6/4. I forgot to drop the sol down an octave, which may have made that earlier to hear, but since I messed it up on the very first listen, I didn't want to change in the middle, so sorry about that. I kept it on the same spot. What's written here is something a little bit different. It's a bit of a reach anyways. Okay, so start off with a 1 chord, straightforward. Now, what's tricky is alto and soprano both stay in the same spot, right? So the clue to look for is you want to look for where the bass goes, which goes to May, and you want to listen for what the chord quality is, right? You've got May in the soprano, you've got May in the bass. You've also, if you heard that the alto doesn't change, you've got that there. That kind of narrows it down, really. If you heard the tenor, great, but even with just your outer voices being on E flat and your alto staying on G, that narrows it down to your 3 chord. It really couldn't be anything else. It has the most in common with the 1 chord, but this does not sound like a minor chord, right? Now you could go, well, maybe the E flat, maybe this becomes the 6th chord. However, the next chord we have is also major, right? So 6 doesn't typically precede 3. 3 typically precedes 6. So you can think of it that way. I hear 2 minor chords. My soprano doesn't really help me out that much, and I can't really hear the bass. So maybe it's 6/3, but 3 typically goes before 6. And if you listen for that bass note, we go from May up to Lay, right? So these are just root position triads here. So it has to be 1, 3, 6, and so on. This final chord of the first measure is a little bit tricky. It's what we covered 2 weeks ago now. The 2 half diminished chord, right? So we get our re, which gives us a big hint in our soprano, right? Our alto stays in the same spot. Our tenor stays in the same spot. And then we have the lay drops down to fa, right? And then we get our 4/5, our fa sol bass that always typically, it's a pretty common cadential gesture. And then we've got fa in the bass of a 2 chord that makes it a 2 half diminished 6/5. Now, if you didn't catch that it was half diminished, if you just said it was a triad, say a 2 diminished 6, not a huge deal because the 7th is in the middle there. That's what's kind of tricky about this. But if you also could hear on perhaps one of the middle listens or towards the end that you have 4 distinct pitches here, 4 distinct pitches kind of narrows it down, okay? And then finally, yeah, we've got our big old cadential. A big old cadential 6/4 to a 5/7. Doesn't resolve though, it ends on a half cadence. So there you go. That's a relatively tricky harmonic dictation, but not even really because of the 3, because of some of the other things. So let's go ahead and end briefly by talking about sequences. So as mentioned before, 3 comes in sequences, and I want to show you 2 sequences here, kind of 2.5 sequences that come up frequently. But what is a sequence? Hopefully you all know what a sequence is at this point in your kind of music theory journey, but if you don't or need a refresher, a harmonic sequence is a progression with fixed intervallic root motion. Okay? We name these sequences for the pairs of intervals that change, right? And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But for instance, the descending 5th sequence is whatever diatonic triad happens if you are, say, descending by fifths. Let's see. Oh boy. And then we keep going, and so on. We don't just constantly descend though, so we can describe a descending 5th sequence as +4 - 5, right? Because if you go down a 5th, it's the same as going up a 4th, right? And then we go down a 5th, then up a 4th, then down a 5th, then up a 4th, then down a 5th, then up a 4th. Then we get back to where we started. Right? With chords, as you can see on the right stave there, right? In this case, they inverted the directions. This one was -5 +4. Doesn't really matter. It's the same thing, basically. And notice that harmonically, we've got 1, 4, 7 diminished, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. Same thing in minor, just change all the chord qualities to their minor equivalents, okay? Notice that we've got a 3 in there, because we get the 3 after, just as a byproduct of this intervallic motion, right? Notice that we get really nice voice leading. Pardon me? Right? And that's where the 3 comes from. It's a byproduct of good voice leading, okay? For the descending 3rd sequence, this is one that all of you should aurally recognize. The descending 3rd sequence is we go down 4, up 1. It's called descending thirds because then the effect is that you're constantly going down by thirds. We have a modified version of this where every other chord we put in first inversion, so we call it a descending 5/6. So notice in that bottom stave, the 2nd chord, the 4th chord, the 6th chord, and the 8th chord are all in first inversion. The descending 3rd sequence is famously Pachelbel's canon, if you've ever heard that. Let's see here. Pardon me, I'm blanking for some reason. Right? And then in Pachelbel it continues a couple more chords. But in any case, so the descending 5/6, notice that gives us this wonderful stepwise descent here. So I'm going to go ahead and play what's written there. Pardon me. And then we would conclude, right? Notice that 3 happens in there as well, also as a byproduct of smooth voice leading, okay? 1, 5, 6, 3, 4. Because you've got these kind of stepwise ascents up, right? So yeah, there's far more sequences than these. These are some of the most common sequences that you'll see, especially the descending 5th sequence. Notice that the descending 5th sequence looks suspiciously like our kind of progression chart from earlier, 3, 6, 2, 5, 1. It's not accidental. When we think of that progression, we think of kind of the byproduct of working our way around in 5ths. And when we have something that substitutes for that, like 4 instead of 2, it's just because those chords are so similar in pitch content that their voice leading is somewhat interchangeable. Okay? So in any case, very brief overview of sequences. As of right now, I don't know quite how much sequences in terms of like knowing what it is will come into play, but orally recognizing sequences is particularly useful because, again, that is where 3 often appears. So if you hear a sequence, not only does that help you kind of clarify what your bass and what your soprano will be doing, because they'll happen in regular patterns, so to speak, but also it's a way to kind of help zero in on what certain harmonic content is at certain moments. Okay? So that's it for today. In fact, that's it for this week. So next week, we're coming back to melody, and we're going to continue on with harmony. Harmonically, we're going to review all diatonic triads and all of their inversions, because we now have all possible diatonic triads. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 are all fair game. So next week, we're going to focus on triads. Okay? We will do possibly do some small review of 2 and 5, since 2, 5, and 7, since those get 7s. But we're going to focus primarily on all the inversions of these triads, because later in the corner we're going to get to non-dominant 7ths. So what happens when you add a 7 to a 4? Or what happens when you add a 7 to a 6? And so on, which happens far less frequently than dominant and then 2, but it does happen. And then after that, we're going to get to complete diatonicism in longer progressions. So we're going to take all the lessons that we've learned, cover every single thing that you can do with light keys, and we're going to do that in 9 to 11 chord long progressions. So quite a bit longer, but with the same material. So that's going to be what we're going to get to in week 9, right before the final. Okay? Homework is posted on GotchaSpace right now. It is due Monday, May 11th at 8 a.m., so make sure that you get that in on time. If you have any questions, feel free to, as always, email me. And with that, I will see all of you folks next time.